On today's show, how is Team Canada's roster going to shape up at the World Juniors? We'll talk about that on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Heidt, QMJHL and crossover scout for elite prospects, with Sebastian Heidt, USHL and crossover scout for elite prospects. And on today's show, we'll be breaking down Team Canada's roster for the World Juniors. We'll give our predictions for the forward lines, the defense pairings, and the goaltenders who are going to start. It's going to be a 14-8-3 roster system there, so we'll break down those players and see who was cut. That's going to be in the first and second segments. And then in the final segment, we'll be making our predictions for Team Canada overall at this tournament. Do they win gold? Do they end up in the final? Who scores the most goals? And some specific predictions regarding specific players. We'll get into that in the final segment as well. Before we get into any of that, though, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get up to $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. If you're watching on YouTube, as usual, remember to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you think of the episode. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get started right away here with the forward lines predictions for Team Canada. They have 19 camp invites. 19 whole players are going to be in this lineup here, but we're choosing 14 forwards to make the lineup. And at the first line, we have three of the most experienced prospects in this roster. That's usually how it goes for Team Canada and for World Juniors in general. The most experienced players make the final cut. So talk me through our first line here for Team Canada.
Yeah, so we have a bunch of experience here with some of the elder statesmen in this lineup for Team Canada. At left wing on the first line, we have the motor that will be driving that line all tournament long, and that is Easton Cowan of the Toronto Maple Leafs, and who's captaining the London Knights at the moment. He's a player that will be really setting the pace and be the main F1, applying that forechecking and back-checking pressure for Team Canada and freeing up space for his line mates to work with. And there we have Brayden Yager down the middle as a responsible two-way center who's capable both as a goal scorer and a playmaker. So he's quite adaptable to kind of mix and match to fit in his play with the wingers he is joined with. And then we have Bradley Nadeau at right wing, the only player in this whole group of players that we'll be talking about today who's playing professional hockey this season with more than just a stint. He's playing full-time in the AHL with the Chicago Wolves, the affiliate of the Carolina Hurricanes, and he brings high-end intelligence and ridiculous offensive ability. He has a great shot, great handling skill, really deceptive, solid skater as well. A lot to like with Bradley Nadeau, and he's not a player that will hamstring you defensively, though he won't be a primary defensive piece on this line. He will not be a player that will be causing a bunch of defensive mishaps either. So a pretty solid, like a bit more senior top line here for Team Canada. But the second line is perhaps the one that's going to bring the most offensive punch in terms of pure skill. So talk me through those three players.
Absolutely. So we have Gavin McKenna, the future superstar of the NHL, on the second line on left wing, Callum Ritchie down the middle, and Andrew Cristall on the right wing. Now we're talking about a hyper offensive line here. McKenna and Cristall especially. You know, McKenna's great in all three zones. Cristall's starting to explore his defensive game, but mainly those two. What makes him special is what they do up the ice in the offensive zone. McKenna through his zone entry creation, Andrew Cristall through his ridiculous seam finding skill. And then Callum Ritchie is going to be playing that center role, helping the defenseman on breakouts, cycling down low, kind of assisting with transitions. And just playing really solid, really reliable hockey. There's a reason he had an NHL stint. He plays a very mature and pro game. He's a decent goal scorer, great playmaker, and has a lot of skills that'll help those two shine. So I think heading up the ice, Team Canada is going to rely on that line, especially after penalty kills, to create momentum offensively. I think that's a great line to put together and have them create. On the third line, though, we have three prospects who play different games. So a decent blend of players. We have Matthew Wood on the left wing, Berkeley Catton down the middle, Porter Martone on the right wing. This is really based on what we've seen so far from Team Canada at the red versus white scrimmage last night, and the lineup that they just put out today as of recording this, where they're playing a scrimmage game against U Sports in Ottawa. So yeah, talk me through that combination of skills between Wood, Catton, and Martone.
Yeah, like you get a lot of size on the wings there to insulate the undersized pivot in Berkeley Catton, a player that when we were first brainstorming this episode, we thought might be on the outside looking in because he is a 5'11" winger slash center, plays that like a pacey, high skill game. That as a profile that Team Canada doesn't always value very highly at these tournaments, but he's been getting a lot of reps with players that project in top 9 roles for Team Canada. So we could think that he'll end up being like a big transition driver on the third line. He can be exploited a bit defensively, but Matthew Wood has become a pretty solid defensive winger at the NCAA level. He brings a lot of intelligence, physicality, and soft skill as well to the equation. This is a very skilled line that could also produce a bunch of offense. All 3 players individually have high-end handling skill, really good shots, really solid playmaking flashes on top of it, and bring a lot of offensive awareness and intelligence. I think they're going to work really well together, find some really good rotations in the offensive zone, find patterns to find space for one another. And I think that on the defensive side, this isn't going to be your third line checking role, perhaps, but there's going to be a specialist fourth line to compensate for that you can just send out over the boards whenever you want some stability and you just want some low event hockey for a period. And we think that Dave Cameron's going to really put that in a fourth line grouping. So talk me through those 3 players, which include perhaps a player that has an inside track for this role as he's the captain for Dave Cameron's OHL team.
Absolutely. So that line starts with Luca Pinelli, who's really improved his defensive game over the past couple of years. Offensively, he's still pretty limited to kind of outside chances. Yeah, he's a 5'9", 168, 170-pound forward. Plays center, plays wing. But yeah, his defensive game has improved. He's shown some hustle defensively as well. Offensively, though, he's not going to be the player driving the paint, driving hard towards dangerous areas. He'll mainly be relying on Jet Luchenko in the middle, doing that along with the defensive responsibilities, and Ethan Gauthier as well, who's one of the leaders in the entire QMJHL in off-puck assists. He's very, very, very good at tying sticks up on his way to the net to create passing lanes for his teammates to kind of find seams cross ice or cut to the middle. Very, very mature game. So the 3 of them are going to be playing mature, high-energy hockey, and they're going to be pushing defenses back. They're going to be, cycling off the forecheck, finding creation opportunities off of that. So a real checking line as a fourth line there, and a line that they can throw out there when you need a face-off win, you need a defensive shift, all that good stuff. They can take care of that for you. But inevitably, with Team Canada's lineups, there's going to be some cuts, and those cuts are going to be disappointing. But before I get into the cuts themselves, that are not going to be at Team Canada's event at all, let's talk about 2 forwards who could very well be very important pieces and even a top 9 role, but are so far, according to our predictions, 13th and 14th forward. We have Carson Rakoff and Riley Heidt as the outsiders looking in this roster.
Yeah, we do. We have these 2 players that have both played big roles for Team Canada in the past at different levels, and who are also among the older players in this roster to kind of round things out. Both players that can bring a lot of offensive punch. So our prediction here is that we have a couple players to really boost the offense as well in down the depth chart, rather than perhaps a defensive specialist in one of these roles. But they can both plug and play into any holes in the lineup. So if there's a top 6 injury perhaps that pops up, which happens at every single tournament for some teams, you have some more skilled, dynamic offensive threats to plug into those holes up the lineup, rather than just being fourth line replacements. But that leaves 5 players on the outside looking in for this tournament. Again, for this episode, this is very much just predictive on our parts. This is not the lineup that we would be rolling out if we were coaching this team. And that includes some of these cuts that I don't think either of us would really want to do if we were leading this team. But based off of the roster that we're seeing from these scrimmage games, seem to be a little bit on the outside. So starting off, we have Beckett Sennecke, of course, the late addition to this invite roster, a player that I think would be fantastic if he were to crack the lineup. But there seem to be a couple hurdles in place before that happens. But if he does crack it, he can play up and down anywhere between 14th forward and first line. So a player that I think should be brought, but maybe left out. Then we have a couple high energy wingers here, right, Hattie? In Matsur Katavar, Tanner Howe, and Denver Barkey.
Yeah, these are three very, like you said, high energy wingers. Now, Team Canada brought a lot of those to this World Juniors camp. I'm pretty sure those are the guys who are mainly competing with the likes of Luca Pinelli and Ethan Gauthier for a spot. But so far, according to what we've seen in scrimmage, what we're seeing against U Sports today, it seems like Pinelli and Gauthier are being favored, so that leaves them on the outside looking in. And with the likes of Carson Rakoff and Riley Heidt, who have played in this tournament before, I'd be very, very surprised if they get the call. Those three get the call above those two, right? So that's kind of the prediction on that side. And finally, Cole Baudouin is kind of in the middle of those two scenarios. He's a checking forward, a defensive specialist, a physical body, an absolute tank of a human being. But at the same time, he's on the older side for this. He's on the younger side for this roster, and unless he's playing bottom 6 minutes, doesn't seem like he's really going to have a spot where he can jump into the lineup and be an offensive force. And on top of that, from what we've seen in the lineups we've seen so far for Canada, again at the scrimmage and at the U Sports game, he doesn't seem to be favored either. He's a 13 forward in one, and I believe he was scratched in the other. So difficult situation for Baudouin, but better luck next year. I'm sure he'll be an impact player next season. But that wraps things up for our first segment. We'll get into the second segment. We'll look at the defensemen and the goalies. We'll look at the D pairings potentially and all that good stuff. But before we get into any of that, just a quick word from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospect.
PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app. Make your holidays bigger and brighter with PrizePicks, the best place to get real money sports action while watching all of your favorite teams play. PrizePicks now offers MasterCard for quick and easy deposits into your account this sports season. Join now because this holiday season, PrizePicks is giving away 2 free picks in December, and they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during Picksmas. Think Connor McDavid will get more than 0.5 goals next week? Austin Matthews even more than that? Cook up hot takes with your friends and win real money this sports season when you and your crew run your game on PrizePicks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page where you place your bets. Whether you want to take your swings on American football with the NFL or European football with the Champions League, the choice really is yours. Or perhaps you prefer tennis or golf, or if you're listening to this podcast, just maybe hockey is your sport of choice. Whatever it may be, FanDuel has something for every kind of sports fan. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
All right, so moving on to our second segment here, we'll be talking about the defense pairings potentially for Team Canada at this roster and the goaltenders that might start. Now, let's start off with the D pairings. Canada has an embarrassment of riches on defense, as usual, and this has made things a bit difficult in terms of our predictions for these D pairings. We kind of muddled over these for a while. Kind of settled on a final 8 with 2 cuts, but let's get into it right away. First pairing, Sam Dickinson is pretty much the lock on that pair, but who's going to be playing to his right? Now, Oliver Bonk is his teammate in London, but we have someone different playing next to him, and talk me through why exactly that is.
Yeah, so we have Andrew Gibson playing in that role, another one of the older defensemen on this roster, a Detroit Red Wings pick, who I believe was traded to the Nashville Predators in the offseason. And he's a really physical player. But the reason that we separated Dickinson and Bonk is that we wanted Bonk to be the complementary player for Matthew Schaefer on the second pair. So this is very much just a fit kind of question. I think Bonk will be the most trusted right shot defenseman in this lineup, and Dickinson the most trusted left shot defenseman. We have them split up just to insulate Matthew Schaefer a little bit more, as Bonk is a bit more refined in terms of his defensive habits than Andrew Gibson is, and I think that Dave Cameron will want to insulate the youngest player on his blue line in Matthew Schaefer. But I think with that top four, you have three players that can play really physical shutdown defensive hockey with Dickinson, Gibson, and Bonk, and then you have Matthew Schaefer, who is a fantastic defensive piece, not perhaps a physical shutdown guy, but a bit more of like a highly intelligent shepherd play to the boards, snuff things out with a bit more, I guess, like cerebral defending rather than that big bulking shutdown kind of defending that Gibson particularly likes to do. But I think they have a good balance there in terms of styles, and of course with Matthew Schaefer, you have a player that could also be like QBing a power play at this tournament for Team Canada, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to be his main role for this roster here. Now, there's also a very interesting third pair that we kind of struggled to kind of put together because there are three right shot defensemen who are going to be fighting for one spot, which doesn't make things easy. But at the end of the day, given what we've seen at scrimmages, what we've seen at the U Sports game, we've settled on Tanner Molendyk and Zayne Parekh as the third pairing there for Team Canada. Now, what gives Parekh the edge on Cam Allen, Bo Akey, those kinds of guys on that right side, given that those are the two that he's mainly going to be fighting with for a spot in this top six?
Dynamic offense. So with our defense as we're structuring it, we have a lot more of those like shutdown style of players in the top four, leaving a third pairing of puck moving, offensive creating kind of players. Both Parekh and Tanner Molendyk are incredible skaters that get around the ice extremely well. Will be probably the best pairing in terms of breakout for Team Canada and getting out of the zone with control, as well as generating offense from the back end to very intelligent players with the puck on their sticks as well. But with Parekh, I have another player that could easily be quarterbacking a power play for Team Canada, while definitely not being the best defensive defenseman in the world. And like I think Bo Akey would be a bit more in that mold if Canada wanted to bring him instead in the top six to also bring high end skating, but with more of a defensive than an offensive focus. I think it's possible, but we think that Parekh skill will just be too much for Team Canada to ignore and to keep him outside the top six on the defensive end. But that leaves us with two final players that crack the roster, but not the top six on the blue line. So talk me through Caden Price and Cam Allen.
Yeah, so Caden Price makes the cut here mainly because of his range, his ability to move the puck, his ability to kind of play a well-rounded game as well. He can do a bit of everything. His issue's always been consistency. So if Canada's hoping to bring him in, hope for a strong game, I think it can bring as much impact as anyone in their top four when he's on his game. Now, the other side, Cam Allen, he's loved by Team Canada. He seems to always get the invites and is more likely for me than the other two, Sawyer Minio and Bo Akey, to make this final cut. So Minio and Akey are the cuts at the end of the day from this Team Canada selection camp. We'll in terms of what Akey brings, like you said, he brings a bit more shutdown ability. But I think that with the solidity that they have in their top four, they're going to hope for a bit more offensive output on the final pairing and have someone that essentially is able to push offensively at a high level. And Zayne Parekh is, for me, among these guys, the highest offensive upside player. He's going to be playing on the top power play if he makes a top six. Inevitably, he's going to have a high-end impact. So I'm really curious to see how he progresses. But yeah, Minio and Akey end up being the cuts. And that's our second segment done. We'll get into the goalies and our team predictions. In the third segment here, we'll talk about who's likely going to start for Team Canada in net and what we think Team Canada is going to be able to do at this tournament. But before we get into any of that, just a quick word from our sponsors over at Indeed. Here at Locked On, we're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match instead with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. You can ditch the busy work and use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging all in one place so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. I got my day job through Indeed, and I'm really happy with the way that everything's clear on the website. Everything, you know exactly what the job description is, what the qualifications you needed for each job application. So it's very easy to kind of make the best decision for your career. So I'm sure that makes it much easier for employers as well to be able to hire the right candidates. So listeners of the show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/locked-on. Just go to Indeed.com/locked-on right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/locked-on. Terms and conditions apply, but if you need to hire, you need Indeed. All right, so let's close things off here with our final segment. Let's talk about the goalies first and foremost, get that out of the way before we get into the predictions for Team Canada, which will inevitably make us look like fools. So let's get started right away here with the goaltenders for Canada. There's a pretty clear front candidate, especially given the two rosters that we've seen so far very early in the selection process. Carson Bjarnason has started both games for Team Canada. He started for Team Canada against U Sports, and also started for Team Canada White in their scrimmage against, the other side of their team there. So what do you think about Carson Bjarnason overall being the kind of main leader out of this group in terms of potentially getting the start in net for Team Canada? And how does he compare to other goalies in the World Juniors?
Yeah, I think that he's definitely the favorite for this position for Team Canada. On the one hand, he's the oldest goaltender that they've brought to the tournament. He's also the biggest goaltender that they brought to the tournament at 6'4", 207 pounds. He has a bigger frame than the others here, which is always helpful when you're building a roster for a shorter tournament like this. But I think that really a big part of the reason is just the amount of progression that he's had in his game in the last year. This season in the WHL, he's been playing some great hockey with the Brandon Wheat Kings. He's up to a .913 save percentage this season. And he also had a really solid preseason stint with the Philadelphia Flyers in the NHL. So he's I think, the player that has that inside track. I don't think he's going to be the best goaltender at the tournament, but I do think he'll be among the better ones. I think Trey Augustine's quite clearly the most talented netminder at this tourney. He was the goaltender for Team USA last year. He's been just an absolute stalwart in net for quite a few seasons now. I believe it will be also his third World Junior Championship appearance for Team USA. He is going to be the elder statesman in terms of the competition and goal here at the tournament. But I still think that Bjarnason, with his decent ability to read play, his big frame, athletic body, a lot to like with this goaltender, and I think he will be the favorite for Team Canada. But he's not without competition either. We have a couple interesting names here, including a draft eligible in Jack Ivankovic, who was brought somewhat surprisingly ahead of fellow draft eligible Joshua Ravensbergen. Talk me through his chances at cracking this lineup and how he's been playing in these scrimmages and where he's been lining up.
Yeah, absolutely. So very interestingly, he's been starting ahead of Scott Ratzlaff in both the games that we've seen. So for U Sports, Canada sent over Ivankovic and Ratzlaff to play in goal for U Sports, which is a great idea. It gives them shots against, better competition. And Ivankovic started both games, both against U Sports and in the scrimmage, ahead of Scott Ratzlaff, who's been his backup in both games. Now, obviously, they shared the crease a little, but mainly it's very interesting that Ivankovic is starting the games, which is usually a good sign in terms of him potentially, making the final cut for Team Canada. And it's very interesting because usually when it comes to draft-eligible goalies, especially undersized ones like Jack Ivankovic, you don't really see them play World Juniors in their first year. So for Ravensbergen, I mean, we thought at the start of the year that he could potentially have a shot as the starter for Team Canada, and he didn't even get an invite, which is very, very interesting. Whereas Ivankovic might actually make the cut and be their third string goaltender behind Carson Bjarnason and Carter George, who was drafted last season. So very interesting kind of group of goaltenders here. That means Scott Ratzlaff is on the outside looking in. At least that's how it looks like so far. Maybe that ends up flipping around by the time this U Sports game is over. But based on what we've seen in terms of the roster structure for Team Canada so far, he's on the outside looking in for this final cut. So basically, goalies, Bjarnason, George, Ivankovic in that order, more likely than not. Let's get into the predictions for Team Canada. First and foremost, the big question. Does Team Canada win the gold medal at the World Junior Championship?
Maybe. It's going to be, I think, a really tight race this year between Canada, the USA, and Sweden. I think you have three really strong lineups between those nations, and a lot of question marks with the other nations beyond that. With Finland, for instance, it's been a really weak couple of years of producing talent for them. Czechia has not even brought all of their best players. Like Dominik Bedenka would probably be their best defenseman. Hasn't even gotten an invite to camp because he didn't play in previous international tournaments with Czechia, and Slovakia also doesn't have the most depth this season. So I think that it's really going to be those three teams, Canada, the USA, and Sweden, competing at the top end. I do think Canada has the strongest lineup overall between those three, but the USA have the best goaltender. I think the USA are going to have the best forward line at this tournament with potentially Gabe Perreault, James Higgins, and Ryan Leonard just sticking together like they have been at Boston College this year. I don't think any of Canada's lines will be able to outperform them consistently. So definitely, I think some good competition, especially with the States. Sweden has some great players as well. At the end of the day, I do still think that Canada is the favorites. But what I am confident in saying is that I think Canada will be playing at the gold medal game. Whether or not they win it, we shall see. But I think that there's perhaps a slightly better chance that they win than that they lose.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm of the same opinion on that side. I think that Team Canada's roster is just, once again, very, very deep. But at the same time, we've seen rosters similar to these end up with fourth place finishes or third place finishes for Team Canada. So that is also concerning. But given the lack of depth in other teams, I'm not as worried this year. You know, the years where Team Canada failed to perform up to standards, they had a roster similar to something like this without any high-end elite superstar talent outside of Gavin McKenna, who's, again, 16, 17 years old. But in terms of, you know, the other teams in this roster, like, I think the main issue for Team Canada in those tournaments where they performed less well was the depth of other nations, right? Like, the years where Czechia and Slovakia were absolutely on fire, the years where, you know, Finland was and Russia were at the top of their game. That's more where Team Canada would falter. But this year it's a three-headed race at the top. So I think, you know, Team Canada will oust at least Sweden and probably also USA. So we'll see how that works out. Also, in terms of the hockey we're going to see from Team Canada, what do you expect to see in terms of the style of play that we're likely to see from Canada at this tournament?
I think that there are going to be attempts made to play a really solid defensive style. I just don't think that's going to work with this group of players. I think that the way that Canada's going to win games is going to be to outscore the opposition rather than to outdefend them. There's so much dynamic offensive skill in this lineup between all four lines that I think a lot of goals are going to be scored by Team Canada, and I also think a decent amount of goals are going to be let in, though. With players like Gibson and Bonk in the top four, you have some pretty solid physical defensive defensemen, but if those are going to be your best defensive presences, I think that there's going to be still a lot of chances coming against, especially with just how many skilled, dynamic wingers there are in this team that perhaps aren't the best back checkers, aren't going to support too much down low in the defensive zone. You're going to see some chances against as well, but I think that Canada's still going to win a lot of their games with like 7-3 goal margins or something in that range with a lot of end-to-end action.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the same will happen as well, unless Gibson and Bonk and Dickinson and Schaefer play the best hockey of their careers. I think it's still going to be high-scoring hockey. To close things off, does Gavin McKenna stay on the second line, or do we think he's going to kind of push his way up to the first line by the end of the tournament here?
I could see him on the first line by tournament's end, but who do you think he would be like bouncing out of that top line? So just as a refresher, we have Easton Cowan, Braden Yager, and Bradley Nadeau with that trio.
I think the most likely to be pushed out of a first-line role is probably Bradley Nadeau, mainly because Easton Cowan brings intangibles that Nadeau doesn't as much, and Braden Yager struggles to bring as well to the same level as Cowan, that high-end energy, high-end forechecking skill. I think will be necessary for whoever's playing next to him to succeed on that first line. So I think Bradley Nadeau being pushed down the lineup to play with Ritchie and Cristall and create another kind of combination of hyper offensive skill would work well. I think, and if McKenna ends up on that first line, if the first line ends up being what it is, what we predicted it's going to be, it's probably going to be Cowan, Yager, and McKenna. That's our final segment done. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, as usual, remember to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you thought of the episode. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, remember to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports. And remember to tune in for our next episodes as we finish up our prospect coverage for the month of December. This has been Heidt with Sebastian High. Happy holidays, and we hope you tune in next time.